Hello and welcome back to the shop. In today's episode, we're actually recapping a previous portion of this build from Metal, Fixes, and Prep. And if you were wondering at this time why I was taking the time to hammer and dolly out this rusted portion of the rocker panel, it was actually to fix the seam on the backside towards the floor pan and what this rocker panel mounts up to. Obviously, this rocker is rusted. It has a hole back behind off screen where the hammer and dolly work is being completed right now. And as you can see, the front side is completely rusted through, so we need to replace it, and that's what we're gonna be getting to in today's episode. Now, unfortunately, you can't buy just the front portion of the rocker panel. You have to buy the whole thing, and that's what I've done, is bought a complete rocker panel replacement. You can see the bottom fender nuts are welded in on the inside, and these things are rust free. They're stamped in construction of the original gauge. So the first thing you need to do is prep the metal. You can't just weld this thing on. You got to get that top electro coating. Some of them come galvanized coating or hot dip coating on there, so you need to remove that as much as possible, and you do that with an 80 grit dual action orbital sander. And then I follow that up with a red Scotch-Brite scuff pad, and then the normal routine of wax and grease remover. Now that everything is clean, the surface is free of contaminants, and we have good 80 grit scratches all over the panel, it is ready for paint, and that's what we're going to be getting into now. I'm using the same stuff I always use, which is Southern Polyurethane's 2-part epoxy primer. And the reason I love this stuff so much is because it just works for me. If you have a better product, I encourage you to keep using it, but I like to support businesses that build these relationships with the DIY community, and Southern Polyurethanes is definitely one of those companies. Tamco is also another company that makes a lot of base coats, clear coats, and primers and everything else, and those are two companies that I try to work the most with. If you're in and around a body shop in your local area and you don't know what you want, they deal with professionals every day, not hobby garage guys like me or you. So you need to walk in there with a list of, part numbers or off-the-shelf stuff that you have written down, and you know exactly what you want. Otherwise, they're going to feel like you're wasting their time, and you might come in with a bunch of silly questions. So with Southern Polyurethanes and Tamco both, there's a huge DIY community following, and that's why I like using their stuff, because if you have any questions or you run into problems, there's a massive online forum for both of these companies, and if you can't get the answers you want from another user of this product, or at least point you in the right direction, you can always contact the company directly, and they'll do everything they can to help you. And that is hugely beneficial to non-professionals like you or me working in a non-professional paint booth environment and are just doing stuff for fun in their own home shop or hobby garage, if you will. For this job, I mixed up about 8 ounces of product, so that's 4 ounces of the Part A epoxy primer and 4 ounces of the activator. I probably used about 4 ounces total on the rocker panel, and then we're going to cut to a part here in just a second where I actually paint the inside of the rocker panel itself on the car as well. You want both the front, outside, and the inside of the rocker panel to be coated, obviously, to protect from rust on the inside as well as the outside, but you also have parts and panels on the car itself that need to be covered as well. So I made sure to mix up plenty more than I needed to cover both the rocker panel outside and inside, as well as where the rocker panel is going to be welded to on the car itself. Now, as you can see, I'm just using a little Harbor Freight little 4-ounce detail gun. The gun itself is not terrible, but it's not something that is going to last you a long time. So don't run out and go buy one of these things just because you see me using it. It's a great little $10 gun or $15 gun, whatever it is, but it's not going to last. Okay, I know that when I buy these things, it gives good results. It's a tight little orange peel, but 5 or 10 uses is about all you're going to get. As soon as you clean it a few times, the threads and the air nozzle are going to basically disintegrate, as well as the threads in the cup itself. It's a plastic cup and they're very, very fine threads, so they're going to strip out on you, and then you could potentially start leaking paint from the cup onto your panel or project. So that's a little infuriating when you're working with wet paint. So again, it gets the job done, but it's not spectacular. Next, we're going to move on to this big old dent in the driver's side of this panel right here. It was actually a garbage truck that sideswiped it from the original owner many, many moons ago. So we're going to see if we can't pull that out with just a little stud welder and a slide hammer and see if we can't get that a little smoother while we're in here. It's never going to be fixed if we don't fix it now, so we might as well go ahead and take the extra time and effort and see how smooth we can get this. The key here with the slide hammer is use very light taps. Sometimes the studs will actually rip off on you and leave a hole, but very light taps. You're not trying to slide bearings like you would out of an axle housing. You're just trying to tap the metal with the slide hammer, and sometimes you can take the little red-handled hammer you see in the background, and as you're pulling the slide on it, you tap with the hammer, and it actually helps manipulate that metal a little better. So I just went ahead and tacked up all the holes that were left from the studs that pulled through, or took the metal off with it, and it cleaned up very nicely. It's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be. It just needs to be better than it was. Alright, now we're getting on to the meat and potatoes of the build, which is cutting out all that rusted area. And as you can see from the factory, there's pretty much no coating on the inside of this rocker, so that's kind of the main reason that these things rusted out, is mainly because whatever protective layer is on that metal from the factory is really the only corrosion protection that comes from the factory. That's why we always say the joke was Datsun owners had these things rusting on the boat before they ever hit American soil, and that's why they're plagued with rust issues. There's a lot of areas on the car that are this way, so when we run into rust areas and issues, we just go ahead and do it the right way and put it all back together the way it should have been built from the factory. I'm just finishing up the welds here on this. There's so many layers of metal that actually meet in this intersection. There's the inner part of the rocker, and then that lip that comes from the battery tray, as well as the footwell area, that all kind of go in there together. So just trying to get all that tacked together and ground down, and then obviously we're going to put some epoxy primer on there, the same that we mixed up earlier. So here's some little tips and tricks. For the most part, I try to fit the car to the panel piece, and obviously you can see all I did, even after we coated that entire rocker panel, I'm not doing an entire rocker panel replacement. I'm only replacing the portion that was rusted out, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. If you notice, the rocker panel itself, the entire panel, if we were to replace the entire length of it, you run into where that door hinge is. All of that panel needs to be cut out, or at least the spot welds broke loose to where you can fit the rocker panel up underneath that panel. And then you run into back at the B pillar, where the back side of the door closes, a whole bunch more joints and intersections and seams. So when you're doing an entire rocker panel replacement, it's much more intrusive than just replacing obviously what we're doing here, which is where it was rusted out. The key to rust repair is always a minimalistic approach. So only do what you have to and only go as far as you need to. Otherwise, you're going to create a lot more work and potentially introduce a lot more problems in the future. So as you can see, we've got the front portion of the rocker panel cut off separately and then tacked into place. And I usually just grind the pieces on the car to the actual cutout of the panel. I don't try to fit the panel and cut the panel that I'm replacing to the car, because it's just actually a lot harder. So I usually tack the replacement panel in place and then take my angle grinder and cut the seam on the car itself. That way you pull out these little bitty slivers and you're actually kind of beveling the joints a little bit, so it actually fits a lot tighter than if you just lay it up there and use your angle grinder and cut the gap, if you will. So I spot welded all of the bottom side of the rocker panel, all of the with the MIG welder, and I just bought a new MIG welder, so I'll probably show that in a future video. And then I'm playing around with my new TIG welder as well. So all of the seams where the sheet metal intersect is TIG welded, and then obviously all the spots I just MIG welded, so that way I get good penetration and good welds. So it's not Instagram quality welds, but I'm not an Instagram welder either. Remember, you don't have to be a good welder, but what you lack in welding skills, you absolutely have to make up for in grinding skills. So we're going to grind all this flush momentarily, and you'll see the results of that. And I think it came out pretty good. And there you have it, everything ground flush, all the beads of the welds, radius to try to match the original shape of the panel to make it look like it was never replaced. If you're wondering why the backside of this rocker patch replacement was cut at an angle, that's the main reason. When I go to do the bodywork and filler, it's a lot easier to fill in and blend and feather out a angled seam versus a straight up and down seam. You can do it either way, but I found it's easier for me and my skill set to do it where it's just at a slight little 15-20 degree angle. So do what works for you. Don't copy what I do just because I say I do it this way. Go out in your garage, get the skills yourself, work with your hands, and then figure out what you need to do next time to do it better. Well, that's it. We're done. We're officially wrapped up with the metal fabrication part of this build. Obviously, we still have a whole lot of things to do before this project is complete, but the metal fabrication, rust repair, and welding is done. So that's the last little bit you'll see of that, I hope. Next video, we're going to be doing something completely different, and if you want to know what that is, you're going to have to hit that subscribe button. If you're going to go to the trouble of subscribing, you might as well go to the trouble of turning your bell notifications on. That way you get notified just as soon as I get around to posting another video. I appreciate it as always, and until next time, thank you so very much for watching this video.